So let's talk about one of the biggest ideas in, well, all of science, the Big Bang. It's the absolute cornerstone of how we understand our universe. That whole story of how everything began about 13.8 billion years ago. But lately, you might have heard that this cornerstone idea has found itself under some pretty serious fire. I bet you've seen the headlines, right? They're all over the internet. These claims that the incredible new images from the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST, have just completely shattered everything we thought we knew. That this amazing new eye on the cosmos has actually killed the Big Bang Theory. I mean, wow, that is a huge claim. And you guessed it, it went totally viral. And this is the kind of stuff that just spread like wildfire. One really popular clickbait video actually said the JWST has proven the theory is wrong and sent the entire scientific community into a frenzy. So is any of this true? Is there really a crisis in cosmology, or is something else going on here? Let's pull back the curtain and see where these super dramatic claims are actually coming from. Because it turns out this isn't some brand new debate sparked by amazing new data. Nope. This is actually a really old argument that just found a perfect opportunity to get famous online. The main guy pushing this whole narrative is a researcher named Eric Lerner, and he's been making this exact same argument for over 30 years, since his book came out way back in 1991. That's long before the JWST was even a thing. He's basically just hitching his old theory to a huge news story to get it back in the spotlight. So to really get what's going on, we have to understand the theory he's so dead set against. And to do that, we need to go back in time, not all the way to the beginning of the universe, but just to the beginning of the idea itself. We're talking the 1920s, and to the brilliant and, maybe surprising mind that first came up with it. You see, the story of the Big Bang doesn't actually start with a bang. It starts with a Belgian priest named Georges Lemaitre. Now, Lemaitre was such a fascinating guy. On one hand, he was a devout Catholic priest, ordained back in 1923. But on the other hand, he was a top-tier theoretical physicist, studying at places like Cambridge and MIT. He had a foot in these two worlds that most people think are completely separate, and that gave him this unique perspective to see the universe in a way that nobody else had before. So get this, in 1927, he drops this paper using Einstein's own math to show that the universe has to be expanding. Then in 1931, he pushes it even further. He says, look, if you rewind the clock on an expanding universe, it must have all started from one single, unbelievably dense point. He called it the primeval atom. But wow, the scientific world was not ready for this idea. Not at all. Even the great Albert Einstein, the guy whose work Lemaitre built on, shut it down completely. He famously told Lemaitre this, that his math was spot on, but his physics was abominable. At the time, Einstein and pretty much everyone else thought the universe was static and had been around forever. See, Lemaitre's big aha moment was this. The galaxies aren't just flying apart through space, like shrapnel from an explosion. No, space itself is expanding, and it's carrying the galaxies along for the ride. You've probably heard the classic analogy, and it's perfect. Think of the universe as a loaf of raisin bread rising in the oven. The raisins aren't moving through the dough itself is expanding and pushing them apart from each other. That was the breakthrough. Okay, so you can imagine this completely radical idea of a beginning to the universe. It brought up some big questions, especially about science and faith. I mean, how did Lemaitre, a priest, square this with his own religion? But for Lemaitre, this was no big deal. He didn't see a conflict at all, because for him, science and faith were just asking totally different questions. Science is amazing at answering the how questions, right? How does everything work? What are the processes? But faith, that's all about the why questions. Why are we even here? What's our purpose? For him, they were two different toolkits for understanding reality. He was really against this idea called concordism, which is basically the attempt to make a scientific theory fit word for word with a religious text, like the Book of Genesis. Lemaitre thought that was just silly. He didn't think the Bible was a science textbook, and he sure didn't think general relativity was a book of prayer. They just weren't supposed to do the same job. And then the evidence started pouring in, especially from the astronomer Edwin Hubble, and the scientific world started to change its mind. And in one of the greatest turnarounds in science history, just a few years after calling his physics abominable, Einstein went to a lecture by Lemaitre. He stood up, applauded, and said this. This is the most beautiful and satisfactory explanation of creation to which I have ever listened. What a moment. Okay, so that brings us all the way back to today, and this whole supposed panic being caused by the James Webb Telescope. Now that we've got the backstory, let's look at what the actual claims are. So, Lerner's argument is basically this. The really early galaxies that JWST is seeing look too developed. They're too small, too smooth, too numerous. He says they just don't fit the Big Bang model. And as his smoking gun to prove that scientists are totally freaking out, he points to a scientific paper that literally has the word panic in its title. Okay, but here's the hilarious part. The paper's actual title is Panic at the Discs. It's a joke, a pun. It's a reference to the band Panic at the Disco. The scientists were just having a little fun with their title. They were not, in fact, having a collective meltdown about the foundations of cosmology. Lerner either missed the joke completely or just decided to ignore it. And look, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's what the actual lead author of that paper, Leonardo Ferreira, said about Lerner using his work. The paper has nothing to do with the Big Bang. He needs to get more things right to even wrong. Wow. I mean, that's about as brutal a takedown as you can get in science. So what's the real story from JWST? What did it actually find? Well, it seems to be showing that the very first galaxies might have formed and grown up a little bit faster than some of our models predicted. And that's not a crisis, that's just science working. New data comes in and we tweak our models to fit it better. It's a refinement, not a revolution. All right, so the whole JWST killed the Big Bang thing, total bust. But, and this is a big but, that does not mean the Big Bang model is perfect. Oh no, it has its own incredibly deep, super fascinating puzzles. So now let's talk about the real questions that are being asked at the absolute edge of cosmology. So let's ask a better question. What are the real challenges? The ones that physicists are actually staying up late at night thinking about? It turns out they're way deeper and honestly a lot more interesting than this manufactured controversy. Okay, one of the biggest head-scratchers is something called the Trans-Planckian problem. So the idea is that all the huge structures we see today, like galaxies, grew from tiny little quantum ripples in the early universe. But if you rewind the universe all the way back, those ripples would have been smaller than something called the Planckian length, a scale so ridiculously small and high energy that our known laws of physics just stop working. They break. We don't have a theory for it. And this leads to some truly wild, mind-bending proposals, like something called the Trans-Planckian censorship conjecture. To put it simply, it's the idea that the laws of nature might actually be censoring that earliest moment from us. It suggests that any of those weird physics from beyond the Planck scale could never have stretched out enough to affect the universe we see today. It's almost like the universe is intentionally hiding its own birth certificate from us. So where does that leave us? Well, the Big Bang Theory is definitely not in crisis because of the James Webb Telescope. But that doesn't mean it's the final, complete story either. It's an unbelievably successful model, for sure, but it also points us toward these huge mysteries at the very edge of reality, where gravity and quantum mechanics just don't know how to talk to each other. Which leaves us with a final question to chew on. Is the Big Bang the end of the story, a flawed idea, or is it maybe just the first big clue pointing to an even deeper, stranger, and more amazing reality than we can even imagine?